welcome to Next for Mobile. We're actually going to have a block of sessions with a break in between that all focus in some way on mobile. In this session, what we're going to do is drill down on some of the topics that we introduced this morning. As more user engagement is migrating to mobile, what does that mean in terms of changing the rules? We're moving from a discussion that was really about ads and ad targeting to doing things that are more actionable. I talked this morning about buy buttons and call buttons and things that are more actionable. The desktop these days almost looks convoluted by comparison when you look at the local search process of doing a search and then getting 10 links and then choosing one of them and then perhaps drilling down into subdirectories or reading Yelp reviews and then eventually qualifying a decision and then making a phone call or buying something. We're talking about moving that discussion into the mobile world where intent is much higher and the mobile device itself has so many more capabilities. We're talking about many signals, but one we're going to talk about a lot today is location. What does location tell us to discern user intent and relevance and really driving all of this using just a deeper set of data, including location among many other signals. So what we're going to do is we're going to kick things off with Mark Plakius, who is a former Commece Group analyst from back in the day, and we're excited to have him back on our stage, and he spent a lot of years since then at Orange, Silicon Valley, and brings that perspective, and that's, we're going to kind of kick things off with a presentation of the things he's looking at as fodder for our panel discussion. But before he does that, I want to acknowledge you guys on stage too and give you the chance to say hi. So Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and Dialogue Tech before we get into Mark.
Sure, good afternoon everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Steve Griffiths. I'm with Dialogue Tech, and we are a call attribution and conversion platform. So we help marketers and businesses understand the role that phone calls play in their marketing campaigns. Earlier this year, we rebranded as Dialogue Tech. We were previously known as If by Phone and Mongoose Metrics, the combination of those two businesses. So I'm in charge of our marketing and strategy group.
Charles, a company you probably have all heard of in the news recently, Here Maps, based on the recent acquisition. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Charles Dyer, and been here under a couple of different hats, but currently with Here Maps, and a little bit exciting times here.
Yeah, and a veteran of this stage, you should add,
yeah.
Right? So you guys are making some great announcements recently. We're going to get into that. So Mark, why don't you combine your introduction with kind of going into your slides?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for inviting us. It's been 10 years since I've been ringside seat looking at the mobile revolution. Obviously, there are more than 4 cool things to talk about, but in interest of time, we'll focus on these 4. And I'm looking forward to the session at 3:15 on deep linking. Mark, you mentioned it earlier this morning. Deep linking is the galaxy for deep linking companies. Quixie is probably the biggest one in terms of funding raised, but you know, I'm really looking forward to Button and what they have to say, because I think deep linking is really about a form of messaging and contextual messaging and putting your whole idea of ads to actions. Deep linking is about putting those actions in exactly the right place. I think it's going to be an amazing change in consumer experience. The other thing that I think all of us doing Christmas shopping this year have experienced is the magic of the transformation of the cash register to chip cards, and the fact that that's concurrent with making cash registers into tablets. This is Clover. There's other companies, Revel, but both of them and others are obviously putting the cash register into the App Store world. So apps ecosystems now comes to small merchants via these tablets, and I think I'm just curious, is anybody here working on apps for cash registers? I think next year that number will be different. And this is Revel's version. So, and I have to throw this in. So this is tablets with no salespeople in the retail brick and mortar environment. This is the Beam store in Palo Alto. This kid on this tablet that's rolling around on a robot is sitting in his bedroom in Davis. I just put that in because it's fun.
It's very Max Headroom.
Yeah. And we heard from Intersection this morning this idea of bandwidth as a public amenity, as a basic right, is a conversation I'm hearing now louder and louder. This is not about, oh, it's a nice to have, it's a must have. And so when that happens, you heard Dave Etheridge talk about 60 sensors in these billboards. That's going to generate an enormous amount of data. I think your business is just going to be incredibly enriched by this phenomenon. And that is going to coincide with the real explosion, I know we heard this word a lot, in machine learning use cases. And this is from a slide by Jan LeCun, who runs Facebook's AI group. And basically, you're real-time tagging the physical world around you. And again, great for your business, but it's really, for all of you, basically in a data-driven business, you need to think about the fact that there's an enormous amount of data that's going to be available, whether it's open data or semi-open data, that's going to drive that kind of personalization that the lady from Facebook was talking about today. And speaking of Facebook and messaging, this is something you need to focus on. We all need to focus on when we think about phone calls and how we communicate with customers. Messaging is a millennial ground truth. People have grown up texting. We have digital natives that's what they do. That's their first preference. They don't want to call a call center. They want to get an SMS or a notification. And for telcos, we've already lost the battle in terms of keeping a hold of that business-to-person communications. And right now, that battle on the regulatory front is going into an interesting place. It's called A2P, applications to people, and telcos are having to deal with companies like Twilio, who are knocking on the door and saying, look, the rules you're using for us to use SMS or to do alias phone numbers are too constrictive, and we want to basically blow open the walled garden. The fact that this is also convergent with AI and local search gives you artifacts like Facebook M, which is a human augmented by machine intelligence to do tasks. Now, this could be a Yelp function, but it's done as a text conversation with a human, but every conversation that human engages in is learned, and it's built into the machine learning platform. So this idea of personal agents is growing. Some of it is avatar-based, some of it is vertical, like in healthcare, some of it is more horizontal. Certainly, commerce is fundamental to that. So hopefully that coincides with some of the stuff we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
One more
Go
thing.
ahead there first.
Since I have the time. Why am I here? I'm here to engage with startups that want to go to the next stage of their development. We have an accelerator based in San Francisco called Orange Fab. The URL is orangefab.com. Please take a look or come up to me, talk to me about what we can do to help you grow your business both in the US and in Europe.
Excellent. So I want to drill down on what each of you guys are doing, but first, I think this provides a lot of interesting fodder in things that are related to both of your guys' business. Charles, the proliferation of sensors, very resident in the car. Steve, Mark mentioned messaging, and I'm always talking about the value of phone calls. That's a topic we're going to drill down to in this session. And sometimes the reaction I get is, aren't most millennials just kind of texting and messaging these days? Right. And usually the answer is, and I'd like to get your reaction to what Mark presented and my premise, which is that they're going to coexist. Phone calls aren't going away for a few important reasons. In kind of business categories where you guys particularly shine, like autos and other things, there's a certain degree of complexity where a phone call might be necessary, or there's kind of a human need or kind of social instincts to have conversations. There's that. So where do you see, I guess the question after all that is, where do you see the coexistence of the emerging messaging trends with what you guys are doing and having phone calls be really a currency?
Right. So I agree completely that millennials grew up with SMS, and that's just a core modality through which they communicate. And there are many others. Our view is there will always be a place for a human conversation. There are certain use cases where you just want to talk to somebody. We frequently call them considered purchases. So things like automotive or financial services or healthcare, where you want to ask questions, you want to check inventory, you want to negotiate price. There's something that no doubt your research process started online and you collected data, et cetera. But there's this critical moment where you pick up the phone and you talk to somebody. Real estate is an example I use a lot. Yeah. So you're looking at homes, you're looking at test scores in neighborhoods, you're looking at crime stats, And you get serious about it, and you lean over and you go, honey, I think it's time. And what do? You call a realtor. And chances are you go with the very first one you talk to. So there's sort of those critical mobile moments, if you will, where human-to-human conversation plays a role. And
supporting that, if we flash just this one data slide, this is forecast data we have that shows the volume of phone calls that are going to be driven from mobile devices alone, and then segmented by different formats. As you can see, search is very much leading because of its kind of very highly intent-based nature and the fact that it really bolts a search and discovery device to something that is, after all, a telephone. When in all these discussions, we tend to forget that the thing actually makes phone calls. So drilling down on that a little bit further, Steve, and then I want to go to Charles. It's kind of ironic. I always say this is a device that's 150 years old, and more recently, because it's in this kind of a whole mobile discussion, which is more kind of sexy and driving a lot of local engagement, driving this call volume. So tell us a little bit of the story of kind of where we've come with phone calls as a currency in the past few years, and kind of where we are now in terms of the differentiation of why that's a business opportunity to not only drive them, but what you guys are doing in the analytics piece.
Sure. So, fundamentally, the challenge for marketers hasn't changed in decades. You got to build awareness of your brand, and you got to fill a funnel. That's what you're tasked to do. So rewind to the Dom Draper days, and you hear that phrase a lot: half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The problem is I don't know which half, right? So then you get the internet that comes in, and this is a beautiful thing for marketers, because now, finally, I've got transparency. I can show clicks, I can show forum conversions, I can show revenue, I can go prove to my clients or my exec team or whoever sort of signs my paycheck, if you will, the impact that I'm having.
Yep.
And mobile is absolutely turning that on its head. Because of the fundamental dynamic here is, it is a phone. It, of course, does a lot of other things besides make phone calls, and I think that the previous keynote made a very interesting point. But you get into those situations where you're on a site or you're in those use cases that I touched on, and it's just so much easier to just click a button and engage in a conversation than one of those sort of desktop paradigms, if you will, of conversion, which is why I think you're seeing this pretty staggering growth here.
Yep.
Projected by BIA Kelsey. So that's a challenge for marketers and an opportunity for marketers. It's a challenge because now all this data that I've grown to depend on to prove my worth as a marketer is gone. It's getting sucked into this black hole because it's in a phone call instead of in an online conversion. So I need to regain that data, that attribution, that understanding, so I can just do my job as a marketer.
Well, absolutely. And the impetus when all of these calls are coming particularly to small businesses, it's going to break their kind of operational daily flow of activities because the phone's ringing so much. So the ability to track and analyze that in a smarter way, I think is going to be important. So I want to come back to a lot of things you guys are doing. Go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to push back on the black hole.
Okay.
Go for it.
It's not a black hole.
It's not?
It's being monitored. You can do emotion detection on that. You can start to look for buy signals in the caller's voice. All those analytics are going to be applied to voice.
If you use those tools, absolutely, and that's part of the value proposition that we have is we help marketers understand where those calls are coming from and what happens on those calls. So you shine a light onto that black hole.
And to do that, you guys are doing a lot in terms of keywords, scrubbing the audio track for keywords and things like that, right? And there's a lot more to it than that, but
call tracking. I think this audience has been familiar with for a number of years, and the first generation was really just associating unique phone numbers with different things, different ads, different campaigns. So when the phone rings, I can get credit. So that's where it really started, but it's really evolving now to a lot of things that you just touched on, which is really help me understand what happened on those calls, not just that they took place. That's what a business really wants to know. Was it a sale? Was it an appointment? Can I match that back to revenue that I generated from my company? And what you touched on, analyzing those conversations, transcribing them, extracting keywords, that's all stuff that's available to businesses today to answer some of those questions.
And then closing the loop one step further in tying that return on ad spend data, which calls were good, back to the campaigns from which they originated, and then iterate accordingly at the front end of that kind of consumer acquisition. So Charles, let's switch gears here. Mark mentioned lots of things that had to do with the proliferation of sensors, and even some kind of auto examples. So as a precursor to talking about that, first let's start at the beginning in terms of where Here Maps is now, that it is owned by a consortium of automakers, and how that really provides synergies between mapping and in-car diagnostics data, and really what that unleashes for just lots of cool stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so as of, if you hadn't read, as of last Friday, my paychecks came from Nokia, and as of Monday, my paychecks come from Audi, BMW.
Is it a bigger paycheck?
We'll see.
Wunderbar, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Wunderbar.
And what currency is it in?
It's still the good old U.S. dollar, so we're good.
Yeah.
But in any event, yeah. So it's actually really exciting times. The consortium of the three, we are considered to be an independent investment of theirs. So it's not as though we're, shall we say, a division or a subdivision. It's an open consortium, and so they're looking for additional investors and partners to come into the play, and they really see it as this opportunity to be a Switzerland of maps, effectively, and a location graph, much like there's a search graph or a social graph that's out there. And so when we think about the different sensors and whether the use cases in automotive or enterprise or getting to the local restaurant or party tonight, whatever it may be, all those components, it's just part of this, effectively, this monster graph. And clearly within the context of autonomous driving, when we think about the maps that we have today versus kind of that next generation of high-definition maps that's being created by the cars driving down and pulling in just volumes of information. And we pull in a ton of information today. We translate that through machine as well as humans. But it's going to go through the roof in terms of the volume of information. We've got modeling right now, just samples like in San Francisco, for argument's sake, where we go down and in one case it's a great enterprise scenario because, oh, hey, we need to understand where the fire hydrants are. What is the setback from the curb to the door? And having that in a CAD sort of scenario that anybody could access from a municipality. And then the flip side is think about those same sensors that might be out there, in an autonomous scenario. It's like, gosh, well, here comes the car. It's coming into the parking lot. I need to find, because I'm in an autonomous car, it's electric. I need to figure out where the local refill is for a little electricity. And I pull in there, and actually the car does the pulling because I'm just along for the ride because it's autonomous drive. And notice that the other stalls are filled up, and so there's sensors within sensors, and those cars pull out because one pulls out for you because that one's an autonomous driver, and yours pulls in and does it charging. You then roll into the scenarios of, geez, well, you have all this information, whether the PI, how that PI is going to be used relative to the cars and associating with drivers. I think a lot of great scenarios, but we'll have to be careful on the privacy-related issues there.
Sure. Well, it seems like the value then becomes, in addition to providing mapping information and information that adds value to the auto experience, as a data provider, it seems like that's where the company goes in terms of its overall value, because the mapping data from here was always very solid. But when you add the dimension of the in-car information, you start to talk about several different scenarios, some of which you just mentioned. But I picture Waze on crack in terms of just being able to know all traffic patterns, not just in a crowdsourced manner, but straight from the source of every car on the road.
Yeah, no, so it's pretty exciting when we think about it in kind of that context. Being able to not only have the cars that are out there driving, we're doing the manual collection ourselves, and then presumably autonomous driving, that's doing that collection, but then ultimately tying that into the consumers of those vehicles themselves.
Sure, and there are probably some privacy implications behind this question, but it seems like, we were talking about this off stage. Attribution is a key topic of, after an ad exposure or after a phone call or after whatever, did the person show up at the store? After someone called, did they get in their car and go to the store? And your guys' data sets together seems like they could be pretty powerful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And having kind of that access to that location graph and tying it to people and to commerce is a huge opportunity.
Sure. The end of the day, we would all love this very straightforward, linear path to purchase, but it's just gone, right? I mean, taking what you just described and the call element, the digital element, the in-store visit, it's dizzying.
Yeah.
And that's what I think a lot of marketers are working on now is journey mapping and understanding where those touch points are and ultimately what levers do I have to pull to improve.
I think it was Walt Doyle from Ware a couple of years ago. He said, it's no longer a purchase funnel, it's a purchase pretzel. So yeah, it's a very convoluted journey.
That's right.
Mark, where does the carrier sit in all this, and how is that evolving?
Okay, so I always get this question, and it's like, well, they screwed up, so can we just have on the next question? So, no, they clearly lost the social opportunity. So the A2P stuff, I talked about the fact that the SMS is now like smaller than message traffic from OTT messaging. So that's done. Sorry about that. Where carriers are focusing, it's understandable, is on the fact that these phones are becoming video screens. So Verizon's basically, in terms of content, betting the farm on mobile content.
Yep.
It's doing the Go 90 thing. It bought AOL so it could monetize that, move to a toll-free kind of, no data plan impact for the stuff that you're streaming. Net neutrality issues aside, that's what the game they're going to play. AT&T bet $45 billion on DirecTV. So the telcos are in the content game for sure. We saw this once before in the 90s, late 90s. That didn't go anywhere, but at this point, with consolidation in the industry, that's going to happen. So you have this rather strange, bizarre scenario where Lowell McAdam, who looks like somebody's grandfather, is talking about millennial content, short-form videos. That he clearly has no idea what this is, but he's betting his company.
Sure. Well, it's analogous to what the cable companies are doing right now, and they're largely trying to fight the cord cutters of the world. But it strikes me that the actual kind of connectivity, selling data plans, has margins that are higher than getting into content because it doesn't come with associated licensing fees and all of that stuff. Is that too simple of a way of looking at it?
At the risk of getting into deep weeds, the margins on pipe are great if you're a cable company and you have pipe, you have wire.
Sure.
The margins on Spectrum are under pressure, and then when you add content margins on top of that, it starts. We're moving into a zone where telcos are now going to have margin pressure from content acquisition costs.
Sure.
And that's a new territory.
Yeah. Now, what about playing a part in kind of the analytics, kind of like what Steve is doing, and you're talking about all of that traffic. Is there a value add in the data that you can kind of provide?
Well, I think, here, sitting next to here is an interesting answer to that because, location is an operator-generated data point in many cases. So we haven't seen a lot of success stories in terms of DMPs from operators, but I feel like we will see that happen. There's been multiple starts and failures, but data management platforms from operators are kind of inevitable. And again, that goes back to how we're going to handle PII. But as we saw with Intersection, they won't be the only people. But yeah, you'll see carrier DMPs coming out.
So Charles, what can you tell us more about the automotive outlook? The car kind of really is the ultimate mobile device. And we're starting to see the vision there from what Tesla's doing, but I think a lot of other people will catch up, and I think the mapping is a key piece of that. How do you see that all kind of coming together in terms of functionality and the value that you guys are going to bring?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So for us, it's not really. So automotive, clearly, our new owners are, three fantastic brands in the automotive world. There's no question about it, and we're all asking when's the employee purchase plan coming. So I'll let you know.
And are you glad it wasn't Uber? I got to ask you.
Actually, yeah, we were really quite
Actually, I want to change my question. What do you drive now? Just kidding.
I drive a 1989 560 SL convertible.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, where's been Michael Oshman?
And well, that's in your family of cars of your new owners.
Yeah, exactly. So it works pretty well. Yeah. But in any event, so we think more about not just specifically around a car and how we need to go from A to B in a car. It's really about mobility. And if you look at where the automakers, those three automakers have invested in terms of their investments, they realize that the 6 million units that they collectively sell on an annual basis is not going to be their future. per se. I mean, it's been a great ride for them, but they need to figure out other modes and investments in mobility. And so I assume that we will start to see more and more of that in the future from those and other manufacturers. So we think about mobility not only just from a vehicle or their car, their personal car, but you think about it relative to walking, to biking, to public transportation, to shared vehicles experiences, the Ubers of the world. So from that perspective, they're making investments in all these different new technology areas, the shared economies, the ride sharings, et cetera. So past that on their investment side, certainly the autonomous car, it's not something that's 20 years out, it's out. We should probably see something in the streets 4 or 5 years from now.
What is Google projecting there in terms of a street-ready car? I mean, they're already out on the streets, but a commercialized one. Yeah.
I think the notion is 4 or 5 years out. There's a lot of information that has to be gathered. I mean, the current map that Google has, that Here has, that anybody else has, is not a high enough definition because we need to have specificity down to an actual inch. If you think about that driving experience from here to the shopping center, or to go get your groceries, whatever it may be, I need to know where the lines are. I need to have the sensor know that I can get up about 1 inch next door, or maybe I've got a foot next to me. So all that information, it's a high definition map that needs to be done.
Well, some of the stories coming out are pretty funny, or you see them all around the Bay Area. And whenever it's kind of a new technology that people aren't accustomed to seeing, it's people just act in weird ways, and these things are getting pulled over, and the cops don't know what the heck's going on. So I didn't think we'd have time, but we do have some extra time here. If there are audience questions, please raise your hand, step up to one of these mics. You can also tweet them, and we'll monitor them, and Charlie will relay your question to the stage. So Steve, let's circle back to you. Okay. We talked a lot about the calls are coming in. It's about helping businesses deal with them. It's about helping them analyze them, maybe even going further steps in helping analyze if someone showed up at the store through, that kind of data. Where's the industry now? What's the state of the art in terms of the differentiation of the types of data sets you're looking at now or even in the future about unlocking more value and analytics and meaning for companies about what's happening through the calls that are coming into their locations? And not just small businesses, but larger call center-based businesses. We always talk about that, not just customer acquisition, but also customer service and call centers and just running a tighter, leaner operation around large volume calls.
Sure. So I guess there's a couple of things there. As I mentioned earlier, the first generation was really just kind of fundamental attribution over the phone. Tracking calls as they came in to local businesses. The next wave was really around dynamic number insertion and starting to get more data and context around those phone calls. So someone visits a landing page or calls from a Google Call extension or whatever the case may be. Give me context. How did they get there? What did they do on my website before they made a call, after they made a call? Pull in first and third party data so I can get a better picture of what that looks like. Where we see the industry really going now is from call attribution to sale attribution. Yeah. So that's great. That's a lot of interesting information. The phone's ringing, very good. Help me tie that back to those fundamental business needs that I have, which is growing revenue, growing leads, et cetera. So that's one piece, I think, where the industry is evolving. The other is going back to personalization, which I'm sure if you looked at key buzzwords in marketing over the last however many years, personalization is always one, right? Yep. That's the holy grail. But I think it's really relevant for phone calls because we now have this data, really, really rich data surrounding these phone calls. Don't plop that person into the main IVR and force them to fight through a phone tree. Use it to proactively get those calls to the people best suited to answer them. Somebody with specific sales knowledge or a customer support scenario, use that data to give the caller a better outcome, and then that just helps the business close more sales. So we really think personalization and sort of that proactive element is where there's a lot of opportunity for it.
I like the soundbite of sale attribution too, and moving closer to the cash register, and that brings up what Mark said in the ability for mobile devices to really be that conversion path pervasive throughout, because this phone goes to the store with you, and then if you're paying with that phone, it's really a clearer. There's always been that gap between online and offline.
And you think about, there's been a lot of discussion around unique identifiers and cookieless tracking and all this stuff. What's the thing that's always with you? It's your phone.
Yep.
What's the thing that never changes? It's your cell phone number. These are things that are so sort of ingrained into everything that we do in our daily lives, and they can be leveraged.
So, Mark, this gets to your point about POS systems, and that really is, the term Holy Grail has been used a lot today, but that kind of attribution Holy Grail. What's kind of stopping that now at the retail level? I mean, I see some chicken and egg compatibility challenges between the merchant deployments and compatibility with the hardware that's out there. What are you saying that needs to be done to get to that kind of that scenario that you outlined?
It's not an area of real competency for me. I'm not sure I can give you a prescription on that.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of the POS stuff, there's payments, there's mobile payments. That's another whole conversation.
Sure, that's true.
In addition to the POS stuff, but I think there's sort of bread and butter merchant relations kinds of issues there, but I think there's also going to be a consumer evolution in terms of going from, well, this is an experiment. You're talking to me in the store with a tablet, to it becomes an expectation.
Yep.
Like, I want to see the entire infinite SKUs available to me here,
Absolutely.
right now, talking to you.
Yeah, the kind of real-time inventory system is something that we've been talking about for a few years, but hasn't really come to fruition. Having it be searchable and all that, and the data's there. It hasn't been really kind of
There's two aspects to a Kelsey conference. Here's the stuff that isn't here yet, and then here's the stuff that we talked about 5 years ago, and it's here now. Yeah.
And nothing that we're doing today, right? So actually, we're right at 30 minutes now, so I want to give you guys each kind of the final word. Since the title of this conference is Next, we're talking about kind of what's coming next. We got into a lot of that, but as kind of a final word for the audience, what do you guys think is either what's you can take a choice, either what you think is coming next, or any kind of tactical takeaways that these people can start to think about their actual execution of what they're doing in the next year. Go ahead, Steve.
So I may have jumped the gun on my last response, but I do think what's really next is personalization in the phone call arena. It's about proactively delivering those calls to the right places to turn them into dollars. At the end of the day, counting phone calls is not what a business is all about. It's about growing revenue, and personalization is a real powerful way to do that.
Yep.
Yeah, and leveraging off of that, something jumped out from your great interview with the Facebook executive. It's clear that we're moving from a search to a scroll paradigm. Yeah. And so discovery is now done as a scroll. And that personalization is going to often look like, serendipity as I scroll through.
Yeah.
But it's there for a reason. It might involve deep linking. It will certainly involve machine learning and artificial intelligence. Yeah. And that conversation, by the way, may not be with a human necessarily. So we'll see avatars and natural language understanding start to emerge.
And if you look at the most popular
Is that
apps,
pretty next for you?
Yeah, that's pretty next. If you look at the most popular apps right now in terms of mobile usage and time spent, they're all kind of that scrolling UI. You got Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, probably a lot more we can name, but you're right, and that's kind of conditioning people to get used to that. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way yet. Charles, you get the last word.
So, I think, maybe tying a little bit more into the commerce aspect and outside just pure automotive, but, when we think about it, I see still continued advancement in the analytics and then the predictive analytics relative to, the top of that funnel or the top of the pretzel. It's, hey, inbound, something came in via call, it came in via SMS. We captured information about that user at the point of sale. We were able to capture information because that end user clicked on the route from their Facebook profile page, and they actually went there. And so bringing all that information into a big data scenario where for the individual merchant, obviously, they can have an effectiveness scale on any given campaign, but then to put that in total scale relative to a publisher or a advertising firm, or say, hey, what are the effective things, and really drive some interesting analytics that will be definitely continuing to grow.
Well, that's a great place to end it, and we're out of time, so please join me in thanking the panel.